ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Carson Boatman's departure from Days of Our Lives already carries the weight of transition, but the possibility of that change leading him straight into General Hospital gives the story an even sharper edge. There is something compelling about an actor stepping away from one familiar world just as another opens its doors, especially when that new world is Port Charles, a place where no arrival is ever simple and no new face remains untouched by the secrets already in motion. The idea of Carson leaving behind Salem and resurfacing in a completely different storm creates the feeling that this is not just a casting move, but the beginning of a deeper adjustment inside the canvas of the show itself. What makes this possibility even more intriguing is that it does not have to rely on a recycled identity from the past. The strongest direction may be the introduction of a completely new character, someone not tied to old expectations, old loyalties, or old emotional baggage, but someone who can walk into an already unstable situation and quietly change its balance. That kind of entrance always carries its own tension. A new character does not arrive empty. A new character arrives as pressure. A new character arrives as disruption. In this case, Carson Boatman could embody exactly that kind of presence. Someone whose youth, intensity, and calm exterior hide a role with far greater importance than it first appears. The possibility of Carson becoming a new employee of the PCPD adds another layer of suspense because it places him directly inside the machinery of truth, suspicion, and exposure. A new investigator is never just another face in the background, especially not in a city like Port Charles, where law enforcement is constantly pulled between justice, corruption, personal loyalty, and dangerous compromise. If Carson's new role is connected to the PCPD, then his presence immediately matters. He would not simply be observing events from a distance. He would be moving toward the darkest corners of the story, asking questions others are afraid to ask, noticing patterns others have ignored, and stepping closer to secrets that powerful people would rather keep buried. That is where Nathan and Sidwell become crucial to the tension. The deeper this new figure digs, the more dangerous his position becomes. Nathan and Sidwell are not just names attached to mystery, they represent hidden truths, unstable alliances, and the kind of buried history that can shatter lives if exposed at the wrong time. If Carson's character is assigned to investigate what surrounds them, then his storyline would instantly be charged with suspicion and psychological pressure. He would be entering an environment where every clue feels incomplete, every answer feels manipulated, and every step toward the truth could place him in direct conflict with forces far more dangerous than he first imagined. What makes that idea so strong is the emotional contradiction at its center. A new PCPD employee should represent order, duty, and clarity, yet the world he would be entering is built on confusion, secrecy, and moral instability. That creates a natural inner conflict. This would not simply be a man doing his job. This would be someone forced to confront how fragile justice becomes when the truth is entangled with power. The more he uncovers about Nathan and Sidwell, the harder it may become to separate professional responsibility from personal obsession. Every discovery could pull him deeper, until the investigation is no longer just an assignment, but a test of who he is and how much he is willing to risk in order to bring hidden things into the light. There is also something dramatically effective about Carson Boatman entering General Hospital through a role like this because it allows the show to make a fresh adjustment without breaking its own atmosphere. Instead of forcing him into an old mold, it gives him the space to become part of a new narrative shift, one built around unease, surveillance, and rising danger. His arrival would not feel decorative. It would feel purposeful. A new man inside the PCPD, quietly tracing connections between Nathan and Sidwell, could become the kind of storyline that starts in silence and gradually tightens into something far more explosive. The tension would not need to come from loud twists alone. It would come from the slow realization that someone new is asking the right questions, and that the truth he is chasing may be far worse than anyone expected. That is why this possible transition feels bigger than a routine casting rumor. It suggests movement, it suggests recalibration. It suggests that General Hospital may be preparing to adjust its current direction through a new figure who can enter the story at a critical point and disturb everything without needing to announce himself too quickly. Carson Boatman has the kind of screen presence that could make this work. He can project restraint and intensity at the same time, which is exactly what a storyline like this would need. A man investigating buried secrets cannot appear too obvious. He has to feel controlled on the surface, even while the pressure around him keeps building. If this is truly the path ahead, then Carson's arrival in Port Charles could become one of those subtle turning points that grows more powerful with time. A new PCPD employee investigating Nathan and Sidwell would not just introduce a new character, it would introduce a new threat to everyone depending on silence. It would mark a fresh adjustment in the show's emotional and narrative rhythm, where suspicion becomes sharper, motives become murkier, and the search for truth becomes dangerous enough to consume the person leading it. Honestly, that is what makes this possibility so exciting to me. The most unforgettable soap stories are rarely the ones that begin with certainty. They begin with unease, with a quiet arrival, with the feeling that something has shifted before anyone is ready to name it. If Carson Boatman really steps into General Hospital in a role like this, then Port Charles may not just be gaining a new face. It may be opening the door to a darker and more gripping phase, and that kind of slow-burning danger is exactly the sort of storytelling that lingers with you long after the episode ends. Carson Boatman's possible arrival in General Hospital feels like more than a simple casting change. It feels like the beginning of a dangerous shift, the kind of shift that does not explode all at once, but instead slips quietly into Port Charles and starts disturbing everything from the inside. After the news surrounding his departure from Days of Our Lives, the possibility of Carson stepping into a new daytime world already carries intrigue. But if that move places him at the center of a romantic and emotional conflict tied to Lulu and Nathan, then the story becomes far more charged. It stops being just about a new face entering town and becomes a story about disruption, jealousy, vulnerability, and the collapse of fragile balance. The strongest tension in this possibility comes from the idea that Carson would not enter Port Charles as someone harmless or temporary. He would arrive as a new factor in an already unstable emotional equation. Nathan's connection to Lulu already carries weight because relationships in Port Charles are never built in peace. They are shaped by history, pain, hidden loyalties, and constant emotional risk. If Carson's character begins to compete with Nathan for Lulu's affection, then his presence immediately becomes threatening, not necessarily because he intends destruction from the start, but because his arrival exposes how weak the foundation already is. Rivalry in Port Charles is never just romantic. It always pulls deeper truths to the surface. It always reveals insecurities people were trying to hide from themselves. That is what makes Nathan's side of this story so compelling. Competition over love is not only about winning someone's heart, it is about fear of replacement, fear of being exposed as inadequate, fear of losing control over the one emotional bond that still gives life some meaning. If Nathan senses Carson becoming a real threat, then that pressure could begin to affect every decision he makes. His actions may become more defensive, more desperate, and more reckless as he tries to protect what he believes is his. The more he tries to hold on, the more obvious his inner instability may become. Love, in that kind of situation, stops being a source of comfort and starts becoming a battlefield. Lulu's role in this emotional storm is just as important because she would stand at the center of two very different kinds of pressure. On one side is what Nathan represents, the emotional history, the familiarity, the burden of everything that has already been built. On the other side is the disruption Carson's character could bring, something new, something unpredictable, something that awakens feelings that are harder to control because they are tied to possibility rather than memory. That kind of emotional conflict is deeply unsettling. It forces Lulu into a position where every choice carries consequences, and every hesitation has the power to deepen the chaos around her. She would not simply be caught between two men. She would be caught between stability that may already be cracking and change that may come at a terrible price. What gives this storyline even more intensity is the suggestion that this romantic competition could become tied to the larger truth of Port Charles itself. That is where the emotional drama becomes something darker and more dangerous. Once personal conflict begins colliding with buried truths, secrets stop remaining private, rivalries stop being contained. The struggle over Lulu could become the spark that pushes hidden realities into the open, and when truth in Port Charles starts to fracture, panic is never far behind. This is a city built on fragile alliances and carefully buried damage. If Carson's arrival begins to expose what should have stayed hidden, then the consequences would go far beyond heartbreak. The phrase that the truth of Port Charles could be destroyed carries enormous weight because it suggests not just revelation, but collapse. It suggests that what people believe to be solid may actually be built on lies, and once those lies begin to crack, everyone connected to them starts to lose their sense of safety. Panic does not come only from danger itself. It comes from the realization that danger was always there, waiting beneath the surface. Carson's character, by entering this emotional triangle with Nathan and Lulu, may unintentionally become the person who triggers that unraveling. Or perhaps his presence forces others to reveal themselves too soon. Either way, the emotional stakes rise because romance no longer remains separate from the larger instability of the town. It becomes part of the same storm. There is also something especially effective about Carson Boatman being used in a storyline like this because it gives his arrival emotional purpose. He would not be entering the canvas as a background addition or a passing distraction. He would arrive carrying the energy of change, and change in soap operas is most powerful when it touches both the heart and the structure of the story. A romantic rivalry alone can be dramatic, but a rivalry that begins to destabilize hidden truths and send Port Charles into panic becomes something much more memorable. It becomes the kind of arc where every glance, every shift in loyalty, and every emotional hesitation feels dangerous. Nathan's struggle in particular could become the emotional center of that danger. The fear of losing Lulu may push him into a state where love and pride become impossible to separate. Once that happens, even small moments begin to feel loaded with humiliation and threat. Carson's character may not need to do much to intensify the situation. Simply existing as an alternative, as a new possibility in Lulu's life, may be enough to make Nathan feel cornered. And when people in Port Charles feel cornered, they rarely respond with calm. They react with desperation, with anger, with choices that create damage far beyond what they originally intended. That is why this possible direction feels so gripping. It is not just about whether Carson Boatman joins General Hospital. It is about what his presence could represent. He could become the symbol of a new adjustment in the story, a human fault line entering a town already full of cracks. Through Lulu, Nathan, and the emotional consequences of romantic rivalry, his arrival could open the door to something much larger, where personal longing and public collapse begin feeding each other until Port Charles itself no longer feels safe. Honestly, that is the kind of storyline that stays with people. The most haunting soap stories are not always the loudest at first. Sometimes they begin with one arrival, one emotional shift, one unexpected connection that changes the balance before anyone fully understands what is happening. If Carson Boatman truly steps into Port Charles in a role tied to Lulu, Nathan, and the unraveling truth of the town, then the panic that follows may feel inevitable. And to me, that slow build toward emotional and moral collapse is always far more powerful than simple shock, because it feels painfully human even in the middle of chaos.